Present arms, soldier, and kneel when a general addresses you. The man who said it had 3 rows of ribbons on his chest, and the kind of voice that had never once been told no. He stood close enough that I could smell the wax on his collar, his gloved hand raised, and across 2 strides of polished floor Corporal Devlin Hart did not so much as let his eyes drift. I was 4 feet to Hart's left, holding the same post, the same stillness, and I felt my own breath go shallow, because the general had come to the wrong gate on the wrong night to demand the one thing this house does not hand out on command. My name is Sergeant Aldous Rain, and for 11 years I have stood the inner posts of Calderwood Hall, the seat of the House of Aldermere, a household that does not exist on any map you would recognize, which is exactly how we like it. I have watched men of every kind come through those doors. I had never, until that evening, watched one try to take a guardsman's salute by force in front of 300 guests. What I am going to tell you, I saw with my own eyes, from a post I was forbidden to leave. It was the night of the Founders' reception, the one evening each year the hall opens its great gallery to envoys and visiting officers from the Allied territories. The crystal was out, the long banners hung from the gilded rail of the upper gallery, and footmen moved between clusters of dignitaries with trays that never seemed to empty. Hart and I stood our posts at the foot of the grand stair, where the receiving line met the gallery proper. Our orders were simple and old. Hold the line, present arms only to the sovereign and the Lord Marshal, acknowledge no command from a guest. We were the seam between the public floor and the private house, and the seam does not move. The general arrived late, which I would learn was a habit of his. He came in a uniform that was not ours, the dark green of the Verlance Legion, an allied force from beyond the eastern passes, all brass and braid, and a sash the color of dried blood. General Cor Vandenil. I had read the name on the guest manifest that afternoon and thought nothing of it. He had a wide, smooth face, a soldier's shoulders gone slightly soft, and eyes that swept a room the way a man counts coins. He walked the receiving line slow, letting people bend to him, and I watched him decide, somewhere between the 3rd handshake and the 4th, that he was the most important man in the building. Then he reached the foot of the stair, and he saw us. I have stood post enough years to know the look. Most guests glance at us the way they glance at the statues in the niches, a flicker of curiosity, then nothing. A few try to make us laugh or flinch or speak. Tourists do it, children do it, and we let it slide off like rain off wool. But Vandenil did not look at us as ornaments. He looked at us as subordinates who had failed to acknowledge him. He stopped. He turned his whole body toward Hart, the younger of us, the one closest to the stair, and his mouth tightened. "You there," he said. "I am a general of the Verlance Legion. When I pass, you present arms." Hart did not move. That is the job. The bearskin sat heavy and black above his still face, his white-gloved hands at the rifle, his eyes fixed on the middle distance over the general's shoulder. To a man who has never stood it, the stillness looks like nothing. I can tell you it is the hardest thing in the world. Every nerve in Hart's body was alive and screaming, I have no doubt, because mine were, and I was only watching. The silence around them began to spread. The nearest guests felt it before they understood it, that small electric hush that runs through a crowd when one voice rises and another refuses to answer. A woman in pale silk lowered her glass. 2 envoys turned. Vandenil's face went from impatient to insulted in the space of a breath, and he stepped closer, so close that the brim of his cap nearly touched the fur of Hart's bearskin. "Are you deaf?" he said, louder now for the room as much as for Hart. "I have commanded 10,000 men. I have stood at the right hand of princes, and you will present arms to me, or I will have you stripped of that uniform you so clearly do not deserve." He let the threat sit, pleased with it. "Kneel, soldier. Show this house what discipline looks like." Here is the thing he did not understand, the thing that men like him never understand until it is far too late. He thought the salute was the smallest thing in the room, a reflex he could demand the way he demanded a chair or a drink. He did not know that in this house a guardsman's arms are presented to exactly two people on this earth, and that the refusal to present them to a third is not insolence. It is the whole point of us. It is the oldest order we carry. A guardsman who saluted on the command of any man who barked loudest would be no guard at all. He would be a weather vane in a red coat. I watched Hart breathe. One slow draw through the nose, the only motion in him, and I knew he would not break. I had stood beside him for 2 years. I knew the iron in him, but I also knew the trap closing around us, because a general humiliated in front of 300 guests is a dangerous animal, and he had just staked his pride on a boy who would die at his post before he bent. Vandenil's voice climbed again. "Nothing. You stand there like furniture while I address you." He turned half toward the gallery, playing now to the watching faces, the way a man plays to a court he assumes is his. This is the famous discipline of the House of Aldermere, a puppet who cannot even acknowledge a superior officer. In my legion, this one would be flogged for insubordination by morning. A murmur went through the guests, not agreement, I noticed, but the uneasy sound of people who do not yet know which way to look. And up on the gallery rail in the shadow beneath the banners, I saw the first thing that told me the night was about to turn. A footman had gone very still with his tray. He was not a footman. I knew the face, Wren, one of ours, posted in plain dress to watch the floor. And Wren was already speaking into the small thing at his cuff, his eyes on Vandenil, his message running up the chain faster than the general's voice could carry across the hall. The general did not see it. They never see it. He saw only the still boy in front of him, and his own fury, and the 300 witnesses he believed he was schooling. He reached up with one gloved hand and seized the front of Hart's tunic, just below the collar, and pulled. I said, Vandenil hissed, "Kneel." And Devlin Hart, 23 years old, 2 years in the red coat, looked the general dead in the eye for the first time, and spoke 7 words that would travel through every corridor of that house before the night was out. "My arms are not yours to command." He said it quietly. He did not raise his voice, did not bare his teeth, did not pull away from the hand at his collar. He simply said it, level and clear, the way you would state the temperature or the time. And then his eyes went back to the middle distance, his face smoothed, and he was a statue again, having delivered, in one breath, the cleanest refusal I have ever heard a man give. I've replayed that moment 100 times. What strikes me still is that Hart did not insult him. He did not say, "You are not my general," though it was true. He did not say, "Take your hand off me," though every guardsman in the building wanted to. He stated a fact older than the general's commission, older than the Verlance Legion, older than the braid on his sash. A guardsman's salute belongs to his sovereign and to no other living soul. Vandenil could no more command it than he could command the tide. For a moment the general just stared. I think no one had spoken plainly to him in years. His hand was still fisted in Hart's tunic, and the room had gone fully silent now, the kind of silence you can hear your own heart in. Then his face flooded dark red, and his voice cracked across the hall like a whip. "How dare you?" He shoved Hart back against the newel post at the foot of the stair, hard enough that the brass cap rang. "How dare you? Do you know what I could do to a man like you? I will have your superior here within the minute, and I will watch him break you across his knee, and then I will have this entire posting disbanded for the insult." He spun toward the watching crowd, his arm flung out. "Where is the officer of this guard? Where is the man responsible for this disgrace? Bring him here. Now." And here is where the night turned, though Vandenil mistook it entirely. Because the officer of the guard was already coming. He had been coming since the moment Wren spoke into his cuff, and I saw him appear at the top of the grand stair the way you see weather come over a ridge, all at once and impossible to stop. Captain Mara Elisand, in the dress blacks of a household officer, the silver gorget at her throat catching the chandelier light. She did not hurry. She came down the stair one measured step at a time, and behind her, peeling off from the walls and the doorways where I had not even marked them, came the rest of us. That is the thing about this house, that men like Vandenil never count. He saw 2 guardsmen at the foot of a stair and thought the building held 2 guardsmen. He did not see Wren in his footman's coat, or Sergeant Call by the gallery door dressed as a steward, or the 4 troopers who had been standing the corridor posts and who now stepped, without a word, to the edges of the great gallery. He did not understand that the 2 of us at the stair were not the guard. We were the visible edge of it. The guard was the whole house, and he had just put his hand on it. Captain Elisand reached the bottom of the stair and stopped beside Hart. She did not look at the general first. She looked at Hart, a single glance, top to boots, the way an officer checks a man. And then she looked at the hand still twisted in his tunic, and only then did she raise her eyes to Vandenil's face. "General Vandenil," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The room was holding its breath for her. "You will take your hand off my guardsman." He did not. Of course he did not. Men like him have never once let go of anything on the first asking. "You are the officer here," he said, drawing himself up. "Good. Then you will discipline this insolent boy in front of these witnesses. You will have him present arms to me as is my right, and you will explain to me why the House of Aldermere trains its guards to spit on the rank of an allied general." He shook Hart's tunic for emphasis. "I am owed a salute. I have been owed it since I crossed that threshold." "You are owed nothing," Captain Elisand said. The words dropped into the silence like a stone into a well. I watched the envoys near the front exchange a glance. Whatever they had expected from this house, apology, scrambling, a quiet bending to a powerful guest's temper, this was not it. "This is Corporal Hart of the Household Guard," the captain went on, every word placed with care. "His arms are presented to the sovereign of this house and to the Lord Marshal of this house, and to no one else who has ever drawn breath. That is not a courtesy he chose to withhold from you, General. It is an oath he is sworn to keep. You asked him to break the single thing that makes him a guardsman. He refused. He was right to refuse. And if every man under your command kept his oath half as well as Corporal Hart just kept his in front of 300 witnesses, you would not need to take salutes by force." She let that land. "Now, your hand." For the first time, something moved behind the general's eyes, not yet retreat, but the first crack of a man realizing the ground he stood on was not his. He looked past the captain, up the stair, perhaps for the host he assumed would side with rank. He looked at the watching guests, expecting to find allies, and found 300 faces that had quietly chosen. And he looked last at the edges of the room, and that was when he finally saw them. The steward who was not a steward, the footman by the rail with no tray now, the 4 in red along the gallery wall who had not been there a minute ago. The seam he thought he was bullying had become a circle, and he was standing inside it. His grip loosened on Hart's tunic, not because the captain had asked twice, because he had just done the arithmetic and it had come out wrong. But Vandenil was not a man who lost gracefully. I have seen the type, the kind whose pride, once cornered, does not surrender but lashes. He released Hart, yes. And then he stepped back, raised his voice so the whole gallery would hear, and reached for the only weapon a humiliated, powerful man has left. The threat made public, the bluff dressed as authority. "You will regret this," he said, and he was smiling now, the terrible thin smile of a man playing his last card and certain it is an ace. "By dawn I will have a complaint lodged with every allied capital. I will see this guard reassigned, this officer demoted, and this house shamed in front of the alliance it depends on. You think your little circle frightens me?" He swept the room with his arm. "I have one call to make, and the standing of the House of Aldermere with the Virulence Legion is finished. Do you understand what I am? I am the man who decides whether your sovereign keeps his friends." And from the top of the grand stair, where I had not heard the great doors open, a new voice answered him, old, dry, and entirely unimpressed. "Then perhaps," it said, "you should know who you have been shouting at." The Lord Marshal of the House of Aldermere came down the stair the way he did everything, without hurry, without raising his hand, leaning on a black cane he did not strictly need. He was past 70, narrow as a blade, with white hair cropped close, and a face that had worn out every kind of arrogance the world could send him decades ago. The Lord Marshal commands the entire household force. He is the one man on this earth to whom, along with the sovereign, our arms are presented, and he had clearly been watching from the gallery above for longer than any of us knew. The guests parted for him. Vandenil's smile faltered, then fixed itself harder, the way a smile does when a man has committed to a bluff he can no longer take back. "And you are," the general said. "I am the man whose guardsman you just put your hand on," the Lord Marshal said, reaching the bottom of the stair. He did not offer his hand. He looked at Vandenil the way a surgeon looks at a wound. "I am also, as it happens, the man who signs the joint defense accord your legion has been pressing my sovereign to renew for the last 2 years. You may have noticed your invitation to this reception. It was not courtesy, General. It was the alliance you say you can end with one telephone call. You were here to be persuaded to keep it." He let a small, cold pause open. "How fortunate that you have spared us all the trouble of deciding whether we wanted to." I watched the blood drain out of the general's face for the first time. He had walked into this hall believing he held the leash, that the House of Aldermere needed his legion's goodwill and would swallow any insult to keep it. He had not understood until that sentence that the courtship ran the other way, that he was the one who had come to ask. "You misunderstand," Vandenil began, and his voice had lost its parade ground ring. "The boy, the corporal, refused a lawful." "He refused nothing lawful." The Lord Marshal's cane tapped once on the marble. "You have no lawful authority over any man in this house. You are a guest who seized a sworn guardsman by the throat in front of the assembled envoys of 4 allied territories, and threatened an officer of this household with ruin because a corporal kept his oath." He turned slowly to take in the room, the silk-clad woman, the watching envoys, the men in the dark green of Vandenil's own delegation who had drawn back from their general by a careful, telling step. I would say the question of who has shamed whom tonight has rather answered itself. And here is the part I want you to understand, because it is the part the general never expected and the part that makes me proud of the house I serve. No one struck him. No one dragged him out. There were 9 of us in that gallery by then, in red and in plain dress, every one of us close enough to put a hand on him, and not one of us moved a muscle the Lord Marshal had not ordered. That is the discipline. Vandenil had spent 10 minutes demanding to see what discipline looked like. He was looking at it. It looked like 9 armed men standing perfectly still, while one old man with a cane took a powerful general apart with nothing but the truth. "Captain Elisand," the Lord Marshal said. "Sir." "General Vandenil is leaving the reception. See that his delegation is shown every courtesy. They are our guests still, and they are not responsible for their commander's conduct." A flicker of something almost like mercy. "But the general himself will be escorted to his car, and the manifest of Allied officers' welcome at Calderwood Hall will be reviewed in the morning. I expect his name will not survive the review." "Yes, sir." It was the worst thing he could have done to a man like Vandenil, and he did it without a single raised voice. Not arrested, not struck, not shouted down. Simply uninvited, in front of 300 people, by a man who outranked everything the general had brought into the room, and then handed back his own delegation's dignity, so that even the men in green understood whose fault this was, and that it was not theirs. Vandenil stood frozen. I could see him reaching for the threat again, the one call, the complaint to every capital, and I could see it dying in his mouth as he understood at last what it would sound like. A general lodging a formal protest because a 23-year-old ceremonial guardsman had declined to salute him. A general demanding satisfaction because a corporal had kept the oldest oath in the household. He would be the laughingstock of every officer's mess from here to the eastern passes. The Lord Marshal had not just refused his threat. He had made the threat impossible to deliver. "This is not over," Vandenil said, but the words came out hollow even to him. "It is entirely over," the Lord Marshal said. "Captain." Mara Elisand stepped forward, and at her smallest gesture 2 of the troopers from the gallery wall came down at an unhurried walk and took up station at the general's shoulders. They did not touch him. They did not need to. They simply stood, one at each side, immaculate and silent, and the message was as plain as a wall. You will walk to your car now, and you will do it on your own feet, with what little is left of your bearing, or we will be obliged to assist you, and you will like that even less. For one moment, I thought he might do something foolish. His hand twitched toward the ceremonial dagger at his sash, an old officer's instinct, the reach of a cornered man, and I felt every guardsman in the gallery come a half-degree more alive, a stillness that was somehow more dangerous than motion. The 2 troopers at his shoulders did not so much as glance down. They had seen the twitch. They had measured it, and they had already decided, in the way we are trained to decide, exactly what they would do and how little of it would be required. Vandenil's hand fell away from the dagger. He had finally understood the lesson he had come into the hall so certain he would teach. That rank is a real thing, and a heavy thing, and that he carried a great deal of it out there beyond the gates, across the eastern passes, among 10,000 men who jumped when he spoke. But that it ends. It ends at the gate of a house that is not his, at the post of a guardsman whose oath is older than his commission, at the foot of a stair where the only 2 men in the kingdom who may command a guardsman's arms are the sovereign and the white-haired marshal now watching him with quiet contempt. He had crossed that threshold believing his rank came with him like a shadow. He had just learned that it stayed at the gate. He turned, stiff as a broken hinge, and began to walk. The 2 troopers turned with him, perfectly matched to his stride. The crowd opened a long aisle to the great doors, and 300 guests watched a general of the Verlance Legion walk the length of Calderwood Hall under guard, his medals catching the chandelier light, his bluster gone, his car waiting in the cold outside. No one spoke. The only sound was Boothiel's on marble his, and the 2 unhurried sets that flanked him, until the great doors opened on the night and closed again behind him, and the seam of the house sealed itself as though he had never crossed it. And through all of it, Corporal Devlin Hart had not moved from his post. That is what I keep coming back to. The whole hall had turned on its axis around him. A general humiliated, a Lord Marshal descended from the gallery, 300 guests holding their breath, 2 troopers walking a man to his ruin, and the boy at the center of it was still standing exactly as he had stood when the night began. Eyes forward, rifle held, bearskin level. The hand the general had twisted into his collar had left the tunic creased, and Hart had not even reached up to smooth it. He would smooth it later in the guardroom when no eye was on him. On post, he was the seam of the house, and the seam does not move. The Lord Marshal walked over to him then. The old man stopped close, looked up into that young face, and said something I was near enough to hear and have never repeated to anyone outside the regiment until now. "You held," the Lord Marshal said. "Through every word of it you held. Do you know what that is worth?" Hart's eyes stayed forward. "It is the post, sir," he said, 3 words, as if that explained everything, and in this house it does. The Lord Marshal almost smiled. He reached up and with one finger drew the creased fabric of Hart's collar straight. A small thing, the kind of thing an officer does not do, the kind of thing that in our world is worth more than a medal. And then he turned and went back up the stair to do the work the evening had so rudely interrupted. The soothing of 4 allied delegations, the careful repair of a reception, the business of a household that does not let one bad guest become a broken alliance. I thought it was over. I was wrong about how far it would reach. Because the thing about an institution like ours, and this is the part Vandenil understood least of all, is that it does not rally only in the room. It rallies everywhere at once, quietly, the way a body closes around a wound. By the time the general's car had cleared the gates, the machinery of the house was already moving in a dozen places he would never see. In the guardroom, the duty log was already being written in Sergeant Call's careful hand. Not a complaint, not a flourish, just the plain record. The time, the post, the order given, the refusal, the officer's response, the Lord Marshal's ruling. A guardsman's word is only as good as the record behind it, and ours would be perfect because we are a house that writes things down. In the communications room, a single message had gone out under the Lord Marshal's seal to the 4 Allied delegations who had witnessed it. Not a defense, not an apology, but a courtesy. A note assuring each of them that the conduct of one officer reflected nothing on the friendship between their territories and the House of Aldermere, and that their own delegations remained honored guests. By the time those envoys reached their lodgings that night, each had already been reminded, gently and firmly, who had behaved with honor in that hall and who had not. The story would spread. The house was making sure it spread true. And somewhere across the eastern passes, in the Verlance Legion itself, the slower wheels were beginning to turn, because a delegation does not return from an Allied capital and stay silent about a general who seized a host's guardsman by the throat and had to be walked to his car. Vandenil's own officers had seen it. They had stepped back from him in that hall in front of everyone, and men do not step back from their commander and then forget they did it. His threat to lodge a complaint in every capital had not just been refused, it had been reversed. The complaint, when it came, would be about him. This is what I mean when I say the system rallies, not soldiers running, not sirens. 9 men standing still in a gallery and an old man with a cane were the loud part, the part the guests saw. The quiet part was everything that happened in the hours after the log, the seal, the careful word to 4 delegations, the slow, certain turning of a legion's own discipline against the man who had embarrassed it. A general had walked into Calderwood Hall believing he could break one guardsman with a raised voice. He walked out having set an entire institution, 2 institutions, against himself. And the only blow struck in the whole affair was the one he struck, when he shoved a boy against a brass-capped newel post and was answered with 7 level words. I went off post at the changing of the guard, near midnight. Hart was relieved at the same hour. We walked the long stone corridor back to the guardroom together, our boothials the only sound, the great hall behind us settling back into its ordinary grandeur as the last guests left. For a while neither of us spoke. That is the way of it after a thing like that. You do not chatter. You let it settle. It was Hart who broke the silence, and what he said surprised me. I almost saluted him, he said. I looked at him. His face, out of the public eye now, was younger than it had any right to be. You did not so much as twitch. No, he said, not on the outside, but for half a second when his hand was on my collar and the whole room was watching, I thought, it is only an arm. It is only one salute. Give it to him and the night goes quiet and no one is shamed. He shook his head slowly. And then I thought about what I would be if I did. Not a guardsman, just a man in a costume who salutes whoever shouts loudest. He was quiet a moment. The uniform does not make you a guard, Sergeant. The refusal does. I learned that tonight, right there at the post. I have served 11 years, and I do not think I had ever put it so plainly to myself. The boy had it exactly. Anyone can wear the red coat. Anyone can stand still and look fine doing it. What makes a guardsman is the line he will not cross no matter who is shouting on the other side of it, and the knowledge, bone deep, that the line is not his alone. That behind it stands a sergeant, and a captain, and a Lord Marshal, and a duty log, and a sealed message, and an entire house that will close around him the instant a powerful hand reaches across that line to take what is not his to take. We reached the guardroom. Hart finally lifted his white-gloved hand and smoothed the crease the general had put in his collar, the way I had known he would when no eye was on him, and the small wrongness of the evening went out of his tunic. Then he hung up the bearskin, and for a moment he was just a tired young man at the end of a long watch, and I thought, tomorrow the whole alliance will be talking about this, and you will be back on post by the foot of the stair as though nothing happened, and that is exactly as it should be. The morning proved me right on every count. I came on for the day watch to find the hall scrubbed and bright, the banners taken down, the gallery restored to its ordinary stillness as if the reception had never been. But the house was not the same, and you could feel it in the small ways. The footmen stood a little straighter. The stewards nodded to us in the corridors with something in it that had not been there before, not gratitude exactly, but recognition. Word travels in a house like ours faster than any message under any seal, and by breakfast every soul under that roof knew that 2 guardsmen had stood the inner posts the night before and not bent for a general, and that the house had closed around them like a fist. The review of the manifest happened that morning, exactly as the Lord Marshal had said it would. I was not in the room, but Captain Elisand told me later plainly what came of it. General Corps Vandenil's name was struck from the list of Allied officers welcome at Calderwood Hall, not in anger, not with any flourish, simply removed, a line drawn through it in the same careful hand that kept the duty log. He would never again pass those gates. And because the house does not do things by halves, a brief, dry account of the evening went under seal to the Standing Council of the Alliance. Not an accusation, not a demand, only the record written true, so that no version Vandenil might invent could outrun the facts. It did not need to demand anything. The facts were enough. Within the week the answer came back across the eastern passes, and it was the answer the Lord Marshal had known it would be. The Verlance Legion is many things, but it is not foolish, and a legion that depends on the goodwill of its allies does not defend a general who shamed it in a host's hall. Vandenil's own delegation had filed their report before his 9 officers who had stepped back from him in that gallery and could not now pretend they had not. He was recalled. He was, I am told, given a posting far from any capital, far from any reception, far from any place where his rank might tempt him to take a salute by force again. The man who had boasted that he decided whether our sovereign kept his friends had discovered that his friends were deciding rather quickly about him. And the Joint Defense Accord, the one Vandenil had sworn he could end with a single telephone call, was renewed 3 weeks later, signed in that same great hall, with the Lord Marshal's name beside the sovereign's. The Legion sent a new envoy to the signing, a quiet colonel with gray at his temples who, on his way in, stopped at the foot of the grand stair where Hart and I were standing post. He did not order us to do anything. He looked at the 2 of us a long moment, and then he came to attention and presented arms to us, the guardsmen at the stair, a courtesy no rule required and no one had asked of him. Then he went up to sign, having said with his body what his legion would not put in writing, that he knew what had happened in this hall, and that he knew which side of it had behaved like soldiers. We did not return the salute. We are not permitted to. Our arms are presented to the sovereign and to the Lord Marshal and to no other man alive, and the colonel, being a true soldier, knew that better than anyone and would have thought less of us if we had bent the rule even for him. So we stood still, eyes forward, and let his salute hang in the air unanswered, and that unanswered salute was the most honest exchange between 2 armies I have ever witnessed. He honored the line. We held it. Neither of us needed to say a word. I have thought a great deal in the months since about what truly happened that night, and about why it has stayed with me when so many strange evenings at this post have faded. It was not the spectacle of a powerful man brought low. I have seen arrogance humbled before, and it always satisfies, but it does not always teach. What this taught me was simpler and harder. It is this: a guardsman holds nothing by force. He is the least armed authority in the building. 1 man, 1 rifle he will likely never fire, 1 oath. He cannot outrank a general or outshout a powerful guest or outthreaten a man who commands 10,000. His entire power is the line he will not cross and the certainty that he does not stand on it alone. Devlin Hart did not win that night because he was strong. He won because he held a line that was not his to give away, And because behind that line stood an entire house that understood to its bones what the line was for. The general had every advantage but one. He thought rank was a thing you carried wherever you went, a weight that made men kneel in any hall. He learned, in front of 300 witnesses, that rank ends at the gate of a house that is not yours, that the moment you cross another man's threshold, your braid and your ribbons and your 10,000 men stay outside in the cold, and what you meet at the foot of the stair is something older and quieter and entirely unimpressed by you. Hart is a sergeant now. He earned it the slow way, the right way, the way this house gives rank by years of standing the line and never once being tempted to spend it. He trains the young ones who come up through the guard room, and I have heard him tell them, in that level voice that has not changed since he was 23, the only lesson he thinks matters, that the uniform does not make you a guard. The refusal does. That any man can stand still and look fine in a red coat, but a guardsman is the man who will not present his arms to the one who shouts loudest, no matter the rank, no matter the threat, no matter the 300 faces watching to see if he will fold. And the young ones look at him, at the sergeant who once spoke 7 words to a general and did not so much as twitch, and they believe him. As well they should. I still stand the inner post at the foot of the grand stair most nights. The receptions come and go. The envoys come and go. Now and then a powerful man crosses the threshold believing the house belongs to him and looks at the still guardsman by the stair as a thing he can command. I watch them decide it. And I think every time of a green-coated general with 3 rows of ribbons and a voice that had never been told no, walking the long aisle to the great doors under guard, his rank left behind him at the gate where it has always belonged. Present arms, he had said, kneel when a general addresses you. We are still standing, we never knelt, and we never will.